Your wife broke rules. I intervened.
You touched her. That ends tonight.
Vivian Harkness's hand slapped against the window so hard the glass shook. "Get out of the car right now," she barked, her face twisted with entitlement as she yanked the door open before I could even unbuckle. The board chair stood planted in front of the hood, like she owned the road itself. Shoulders tight, eyes blazing, breath sharp and furious. My wife, Lena, clutched her stomach with both hands, whispering my name, trying to stop the wave of pain rolling through her abdomen. Vivian didn't care, not once, not for a second. "You're blocking the flow of traffic," the enforcer in crimson snapped, leaning into the car as if she had every right to invade my family's space. "Move this vehicle, or I'll escalate this immediately." She didn't know I'd spent 15 years designing emergency response protocols for the exact situations she was violating. She didn't know her every action was already breaking 3 safety statutes. She didn't know she'd just crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. But I knew. And when her fingers closed around my pregnant wife's wrist, something inside me snapped so sharply it felt like my chest collapsed. "Touch her again," I said quietly, evenly, "and you'll answer to someone you're not prepared for." If you've ever felt that burn in your chest when someone threatens the person you die for, stay with me and hit subscribe now. Lena's voice trembled. "Chase, just help me sit up." The clipboard queen ignored her completely. "You two don't get to decide the rules here." She tugged harder, dragging Lena's upper body out of the seat with a strength that came from pure rage, not logic. Lena cried out, clutching her stomach as the seatbelt strained across her hip. That sound. That was the moment everything slowed. My father's last warning hit me like a flash flood. Protect them, Chase. Protect them, even when you're outnumbered. I stepped out of the car, placing myself between Lena and the tyrant in heels, feeling every heartbeat echo against my ribs. I could almost hear the redwood arch creaking in the wind above our driveway. My dad carved it by hand the year I was born, a symbol of the boundary he swore would always protect this family. And now this woman, the officer of rules, was ripping through that legacy like it meant nothing. "I'm calling law enforcement," Vivian hissed. "You're threatening an HOA official." "You don't want to do that," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Because the first responder who will answer that call shares my last name." She blinked. Confusion cracked her confidence. "What?" "My brother," I said. "He's the SWAT captain for this district." The reaction was instant. Her face flickered between shock and fury, but her pride wouldn't let her back. Down, she doubled down instead. She always did. "You people think you're special." The clipboard queen jabbed a finger at me. "You think rules don't apply to you. You think Lena's in medical distress," I cut in. "Look at her." But she didn't, couldn't. Because any acknowledgement of our reality would require empathy, and Vivian Harkness operated on power, not compassion. Lena whimpered behind me, breath shaky. Her contractions weren't normal, not tonight, not like this. The wind shifted as distant sirens began to echo through the neighborhood, not racing, not urgent, strategic, measured, familiar. Vivian smirked, thinking she'd won something. "Good. They're almost here." I stared straight into her eyes. "Yes," I murmured. "They are." And for the first time, she understood this wasn't going the way she imagined. The sirens grew louder, tires slowed, doors opened, and the first person who stepped out wasn't a patrol officer. It was my brother. Eli's boots hit the pavement before the patrol SUV even rolled to a stop. His jaw was set, his shoulders rigid. The kind of posture he only carried when something felt deeply, dangerously wrong. He didn't look at the officers stepping out behind him. He didn't look at the houses or the gathering neighbors. His eyes locked straight onto Lena and then onto the handprint forming on her arm from where Vivian Harkness had dragged her. "Chase, what happened?" he asked, voice low, controlled, deadly calm. "Where are you watching from?" I asked quietly, because some stories demand witnesses, real ones, before the storm truly hits. Before I could answer, the board chair stepped forward like she was welcoming dignitaries. "Finally," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her blazer. "I'm the one who requested backup. This man is refusing lawful HOA instructions and causing a disturbance. Eli turned his head slowly toward her. I watched the precise moment he recognized what she was. Not an official, not an authority figure, just a woman inflated with borrowed power. "You put your hands on a pregnant woman?" he asked. She scoffed. She was resisting the rules. "The rules?" Eli repeated. His stare hardened. "You laid hands on a medical patient." Vivian's mouth twisted. "She was sitting in a running vehicle blocking the—" "She was in pain," I said, stepping beside Lena. "That's why we stopped." The enforcer in crimson jabbed a finger at me. "You don't get to weaponize excuses. Our community has standards, and you two—" "You dragged her out of the car," I snapped. "Say those words out loud, Vivian, for once." Her eyes flashed fury. "You're distorting events." "She screamed," Lena whispered from behind me, voice thin, trembling, and she pulled me before I could move. That broke something in Eli's expression. The SWAT commander vanished, and the brother stepped forward. His hand hovered protectively near his holster, not threatening, but ready. "If you've ever watched someone you love get mishandled by a person hiding behind fake authority," I said quietly, letting the audience feel every word, "you know exactly what's boiling in my chest." Several neighbors had gathered now, whispering among themselves. Some clutched their phones. Others crossed their arms, staring at the clipboard queen like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken judgment. Vivian straightened her spine. "This man is trying to undermine the HOA. He's escalating. Arrest him for threatening behavior." A laugh, sharp, humorless, escaped Eli. "Ma'am, you don't dictate arrests, and you certainly don't dictate jurisdiction." Her eyes narrowed. "I represent the governing body of this community." "You represent nothing tonight," he replied. "Not after physically assaulting a woman in medical distress." She took a step back, shaken by the shift in power, but unwilling to surrender. "You can't prove anything. We don't have this on record." I held up my phone. "I do." Her face drained. The tyrant in heels stared at the screen like it was a live grenade I'd tossed into her hands. She reached for it, but I stepped back. "Evidence of your actions," I said calmly. "And believe me, I know how to authenticate tactical footage." "You're lying," she whispered. "I designed the systems your officers use," I responded. "Every safety protocol you broke, I wrote the manuals on them." The crowd murmured louder. Eli moved closer to the other officers, lowering his voice. "We need medical evaluation for the patient first. Everything else can wait." Vivian lunged forward. "This is my community. You don't get to override me." "No," Eli said, turning toward her with a steady, chilling tone. "This is my family, and you don't get to harm them." The officer of rules froze as paramedics rolled in, summoned by Eli long before he arrived. Two of them approached Lena, guiding her gently back into her seat, asking rapid questions while monitoring her vitals. Vivian pointed wildly at them. "They're not authorized. I didn't approve emergency vehicles entering the subdivision." Everyone stared at her. Even her own board members, lurking farther down the sidewalk, looked horrified. "That's enough," Eli said. "Stand back." For the first time that night, she shut her mouth. Not willingly, not gracefully, but because every eye in the neighborhood was finally seeing her clearly. The redwood archway swayed overhead, casting a long shadow across her face, a reminder of the boundary she'd crossed. Lena's breathing steadied as the paramedics worked. Her voice cracked as she looked up at me. "Chase, don't let her near me." "I won't," I whispered, and I meant it. The first cracks in Vivian's power had appeared, and she felt every one. The paramedics guided Lena onto the stretcher, securing her gently while keeping her vitals in check. Her breaths had softened, but the fear in her eyes hadn't faded. I walked beside her as they rolled toward the ambulance, my hand wrapped around hers. She squeezed my fingers weakly, seeking reassurance, and I forced myself to steady my voice. "I'm right here," I told her. "I'm not leaving." Behind us, Vivian Harkness paced like a trapped animal. The board chair muttered sharply under her breath, clutching her clipboard as if it might rebuild her crumbling authority. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the neighbors watching her, their faces tight with disapproval, her confidence cracked in small, visible fractures. Eli held the line, keeping her at a distance. "Do not approach them," he warned. "I have every right," she snapped. "Not anymore. he cut in. You forfeited that when you put your hands on her. The enforcer in crimson visibly swallowed that truth, but her pride refused to concede. She resisted a lawful directive. She insisted loudly, voice shaking with desperation more than power. You residents saw? No one saw anything close to lawful, came a voice from the sidewalk. I turned, Jonah Pierce. The conflicted witness stood halfway between our group and the curb, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes darting nervously between Vivian and the rest of us. He clutched a folded HOA binder against his chest like a shield. Sweat glistened at his temple despite the cold evening air. Vivian stiffened. Jonah, she said sharply, not now. He flinched at her tone. That tiny movement told me everything. The guilt, the fear, the weight of secrets he'd been choking on. I need to say something, Jonah murmured. Vivian stepped toward him, heels clicking sharply on the asphalt. You will do no such thing, the clipboard queen hissed. Go home. That's an order. Jonah's breath faltered. His gaze fell to the ground. His shoulders tightened, like he was trying to shrink into himself. He looked every bit the man who'd spent years under someone else's thumb, someone who weaponized power to keep others silent. But he lifted his eyes toward Lena, toward the medical crew checking her vitals. And something in him shifted. Guilt bloomed across his face. Shame. And then resolve, tentative but real. This isn't right, he whispered. Vivian stormed toward him. You don't speak. Do you understand? Don't make me remind you what's at stake. His fingers trembled. He clutched the binder tighter, knuckles white. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. I saw everything, he said quietly. The air between us changed. Neighbors leaned in, the murmurs swelling. Eli took a single step closer to Jonah, as if encouraging him to keep going. Vivian's voice cracked as she barked. Jonah, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, he whispered, trembling but standing firmer than before. I do. He looked at Lena on the stretcher again, eyes softening, guilt washing across his features like a tide. She didn't resist anything, he said. Vivian's eyes widened with rage. You're mistaken. You always misinterpret situations. You grabbed her first, Jonah said louder. You reached into the vehicle before asking any questions. You pulled her forward. That's what happened. A hush fell over the block. Vivian's face went pale, then flushed with fury. You traitor, she hissed. Do you want to lose your position, your privileges? Do you realize what you're risking? He shook his head slowly. I'm risking less than what she risked. He pointed toward Lena. Her life, her baby. You crossed a line, Vivian. The tyrant in heels trembled with disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't form words. She wasn't angry that he exposed what happened. She was shocked that he dared to oppose her at all. Eli stepped forward. Mr. Pierce, is there anything else you need to say? Jonah's eyes flicked to Vivian, then back to us. He swallowed hard. She's been pushing limits, issuing citations we never approved, enforcing rules outside our jurisdiction. His voice cracked. I tried to tell her to stop. The words hit harder than I expected. Vivian lunged toward him. You're lying. You're twisting everything. Back up, Eli barked, placing himself between them. The officer of rules finally realized she was losing control, not just of the situation, but of the people she'd ruled through fear for years. The ambulance doors closed behind Lena, and I felt a surge of protective fury rise in my chest. Vivian might have started this, but she wasn't going to finish it. Not after tonight. The ambulance pulled away with Lena inside, red lights washing over the houses as the sirens faded down the road. I stood there for a moment, hands still trembling, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Every instinct in me wanted to jump into my truck and follow, but Eli caught my arm before I could move. Chase, he said quietly, go to the hospital. I'll secure the scene. I'm not leaving until I know she's safe, I told him, voice tighter than I expected. But I'm not letting her rewrite what happened. Eli nodded, understanding the storm inside me. Behind us, Vivian Harkness was already spiraling. The board chair strutted toward the cluster of neighbors forming around Jonah, barking orders like she still had authority to command loyalty. Everyone disperse, she snapped. This is a private HOA matter. You have no right to gather here. Vivian, a man from the corner house, interrupted. A pregnant woman was hurt. That's everybody's concern. His words were gasoline. The enforcer in crimson whipped toward him. Stay out of this, she seethed. You people don't understand the rules. He violated parking protocols and he stopped because his wife was in pain, the woman beside him said. We all saw her. Vivian's jaw twitched as her grip on her clipboard tightened. You're all misinformed. Jonah is spreading false accusations and I'll be filing a report. You won't be filing anything, Eli cut in, stepping between her and the neighbors. Not until this incident is documented properly. The clipboard queen glared at him with a venom so sharp it could have cut through concrete. You're overstepping, Captain. And you're obstructing medical response, he replied calmly. Which is a crime. Gasps rippled through the circle of onlookers. Vivian stumbled over her words. That's absurd. She wasn't in danger. She was clutching her stomach and crying, someone said. She was dragged out of the car, another added. Vivian pivoted toward Jonah, her voice trembling with rage. You did this. You're trying to turn them all against me. Jonah, still shaking, stepped back, eyes downcast. His voice barely reached above a whisper. I'm telling the truth. But the truth wasn't something the tyrant in heels ever valued. She advanced on him, heels stabbing into the pavement like punctures. You have no idea what the consequences will be for betraying your own board president. He flinched. The guilt that had lived on his shoulders for years slid into raw fear. I could see it. His instinct to fold, to retreat, to apologize even when he wasn't wrong. Jonah, I said, stepping forward, you're doing the right thing. Don't let her frighten you back into silence. His eyes lifted to mine, just a flicker, but it was enough to break her momentum. Vivian whirled on me instead. The officer of rules looked unhinged now, like someone whose entire identity had cracked and was spilling through the seams. You think you can walk into this neighborhood and change everything? She spat. You think your wife's condition excuses your behavior? You think your brother's badge gives you the right to ignore the HOA? I stepped closer, unblinking. I think dragging a pregnant woman onto the pavement because you don't like where I parked makes you dangerous. Her face twisted. You provoked me. You abuse power, I corrected. The neighbors murmured louder. Some filmed, some whispered, some crossed their arms, silently affirming the shift happening right there in the street. Eli signaled the patrol officers. Document every witness here. Take statements. This doesn't get buried. Vivian's composure shattered completely. No, you can't take statements. This is internal HOA business. One of the patrol officers shook his head. Not anymore, ma'am. The power she'd wielded for years evaporated in seconds. She backed up, pointing at each of us as if naming enemies in a war she'd already lost. I'll fight every single one of you. I will not be humiliated by people who don't respect the structure of this community. The enforcer in crimson spun around and marched toward her SUV. She fumbled with her keys, nearly dropping them, then slammed herself inside. Tires screeched as she tore down the street, leaving the crowd staring after her. Eli exhaled. She's going to retaliate. Count on it. I know, I said, watching her taillights disappear. But she made the mistake of hurting my family. Jonah approached me hesitantly. She won't let this go. She'll escalate. I looked him dead in the eyes. Let her, because next time, I'll be ready. He swallowed hard. There's something you should see, something important. His internal struggle was written all over him, and whatever he was about to reveal would change everything. Jonah stood there trembling, fingers tightening around the binder he carried, like it was made of glass. The street was still buzzing with murmurs from neighbors, but all I heard was the faint echo of sirens fading toward the hospital. My wife was somewhere on a stretcher, scared and hurting. And now this man, this conflicted, guilt-ridden vice president, was staring at me like he held a match and the whole HOA was soaked in gasoline. What is it? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my chest was tightening. He swallowed hard. Not here, he whispered. His eyes flicked toward the end of the street where Vivian Harkness had vanished minutes earlier. She has people watching. She always has people watching. The board chair had always thrived on surveillance, control, fear. It made sense her shadow stretched longer than the street itself. Eli stepped closer. If you know something that affects my brother's family, you need to say it. Jonah's eyes darted between us. I will. Just not on the road. She'll twist anything said out here. I exhaled, nodding. Fine, talk at my place. The redwood archway loomed above the driveway as we approached, its carved grain glowing under the porch light, a reminder of everything my father built, everything worth fighting for. Jonah stared at it like he didn't belong under something so rooted and honest. Inside, I motioned him to sit at the kitchen island. Eli stayed by the door, watchful. Jonah placed the binder down gently, fingertips shaking. What she did today, he murmured, that wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of anger. It's the culmination of months, years of pushing the limits. I leaned forward. Speak plainly. He flinched at my tone. Guilt seeped into his expression. Vivian's been enforcing rules outside our jurisdiction. Entire streets, yours included, aren't even under HOA authority. They were never properly incorporated. A cold wave rolled through me, he went on. She found out last year. Instead of correcting it, she started manufacturing compliance, issuing violations based on interpretations that don't exist. She keeps saying it's temporary expansion, but none of it's legal. Eli crossed his arms. You're telling me she's been acting outside her charter this entire time? Jonah nodded slowly. Yes, she's terrified of losing control. If the residents learn the truth, half the HOA's enforcement collapses. I stared at the binder. And this has what? Proof? He shook his head quickly. Not documents. She keeps those locked up. My jaw tensed. He lifted both hands in defense. But I have something else, something more important. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook. Not official, not formal, personal, torn-edged pages, scrawled handwriting, highlighted notes. What is that? I asked. My log, he said softly. Every time she forced a vote, every rule she created without approval, every meeting she concealed, every action she took without standing. My breath hitched. This wasn't paper evidence. It was lived evidence. He slid the notebook toward me. These are timestamps, witness names, ratios of votes, dates she stepped outside protocol. I wrote it all down because I knew one day someone would need it. And you didn't come forward sooner? Eli asked sharply. Jonah's shoulders collapsed. She threatened me. She threatened my job, my home. My wife has leukemia. I couldn't risk losing insurance. I couldn't. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't speak earlier. I softened slightly. The man wasn't evil. He was trapped. But Vivian, the enforcer in crimson, had twisted a vulnerable man into silent obedience. I opened the notebook. My heartbeat quickened as I skimmed the entries. Meetings that never happened, rules never approved, violations issued in retaliation, attempts to forge boundary lines, threats to board members, her obsession with expanding authority. You're sure this is accurate? I asked. He nodded. Every word. The clipboard queen was no longer just reckless. She was operating an illegal, self-made empire. I closed the notebook. This is exactly the leverage she's terrified of. A legal standing issue, Eli said quietly. The one thing she can't spin. Jonah swallowed. If she finds out I helped you, she'll destroy me. She already destroyed herself, I said. You're just helping expose it. A car engine rumbled outside, hard, aggressive. Jonah's eyes widened. It's her. We moved to the window. Vivian Harkness's SUV idled at the curb, headlights cutting through the yard like interrogation beams. She stepped out, her silhouette sharp beneath the street lamp. And she wasn't coming to apologize. She was coming to wage the next round of her war. Vivian Harkness stepped out of her SUV like she'd just been summoned by the devil himself, chin high, shoulders squared, that signature crimson blazer blazing under the street lamp. The enforcer in crimson didn't knock. She didn't pause. She stormed straight up my driveway like the earth owed her passage. Jonah shrank behind my shoulder the moment she appeared, his breath shallow, hands trembling so hard I could hear the faint rustle of his sleeves. She spotted him through my window and smirked, slow, poisonous. There you are, she said, voice sharp enough to slit the air. I figured you'd crawl somewhere pathetic. I opened the door before she could step closer. You're trespassing, I said. planting myself firmly between her and the house. The clipboard queen cocked her head. On HOA property? I don't think so. I kept my voice level. This isn't HOA property, and you know it. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. Quick, barely visible, but real. Then she smoothed it over with that icy, confident smirk she always wore when she thought she still had the upper hand. Behind me, Jonah whispered, "She can't be here. She can't." Vivian's eyes darted past me to him. "You, get out here now." He froze. His knees seemed to buckle. "No," I said. "He's not stepping outside." The tyrant in heels crossed her arms. "He's a sitting board member. He doesn't get to hide behind you." Eli stepped forward then, calm but coiled with readiness. "Nobody's hiding, but you're done ordering people around tonight." Vivian shifted her glare to him. "And you are the muscle?" Eli didn't blink. "I'm the one who saw what you did to Chase's wife. You should be grateful I'm not wearing my badge right now." She swallowed once. It was small, but I saw it. Fear. Then she laughed, sharp, brittle, unconvincing. "Your wife tripped. I barely touched her. If she exaggerated, that's not my problem." My blood heated. "She's pregnant, and you dragged her out of that car." The officer of rules lifted one manicured finger. "Allegedly." The way she said it made my fist clench. Jonah spoke up then, quiet, trembling. "Vivian, you can't keep doing this. You can't keep acting like we have authority we don't." Vivian's head snapped toward him, eyes widening with fury. "You ungrateful coward." He recoiled as though slapped. I stepped closer. "That's harassment, and you're finished." She rolled her shoulders back. "You think you have something? Some little story? A sad notebook full of scribbles?" Her gaze flicked to my kitchen island where Jonah had set the log. "And you think anyone's going to believe the ramblings of a man who cries in parking lots?" Jonah flinched hard. "That's enough," I said, voice low. Vivian smirked. "Or what? You'll threaten me with your brother? With your little emotional support tree? With your imaginary non-HOA status?" Wrong move. I took one step closer. "Vivian, I know. I know about the incorporation failure. I know the streets you're controlling illegally. I know the votes you've forced. And I know you've been operating outside charter since before I moved here." Her face drained of color, just for a moment. Then she puffed herself up again. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. "Want to bet?" I asked, pulling Jonah's notebook from behind my back. "Because he wrote everything down. Every meeting you faked, every vote you bullied, every rule you fabricated." Vivian's eyes went wild. "You traitor," she whispered toward Jonah. "You absolute—" He shook his head. "I'm done covering for you." Vivian's heel clicked hard on the concrete as she turned back to me. "You just made a massive mistake, Chase." "No," I said. "You did the moment you put your hands on my wife." Her nostrils flared. "This neighborhood will not side with you. You're nothing but chaos." I pointed to the street. "Then why are there 8 porch lights on right now? Why are people watching from windows? They're tired, Vivian." She stiffened. She knew I was right. She wasn't losing control. She had already lost it. "And one more thing," I added. "I've committed to action now. Official action, legal action." The board chair faltered. "Legal action?" "Yes, the kind that ends reigns like yours." Her expression cracked, only for a second, but enough to show the panic she'd been hiding. She stepped back, got into her SUV, and slammed the door so hard the headlights flickered. She sped off, tires kicking gravel across the driveway. Silence settled over the yard. Eli exhaled. Jonah collapsed onto my porch steps, and I, holding the notebook, hearing my wife's frightened voice in my head, knew something with absolute clarity. This had just become personal in a way that changed everything. Jonah sat on my porch steps with his hands buried in his hair, shoulders shaking as though the weight of every bad decision he'd ever made was pressing straight through his spine. Eli moved inside to give us privacy, but I stayed beside him, waiting, letting the silence settle until he could breathe steadily again. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red and wet. "She's not stopping Chase," he whispered. "Vivian Harkness. She's going to burn this place to the ground if she thinks it keeps her in control." I sat next to him. "She already started," I said. "Dragging my wife out of the car proved that. He flinched at the reminder, not because he was guilty of it, but because he'd watched the enforcer in Crimson Spiral for months and done nothing. I tried to walk away, he said, voice cracking. Every time I stepped back, she invented a crisis to pull me in again, a fake violation, a late fee she made up on the spot, a warning letter to prove she had power. I let him talk. He needed to. And tonight, his breath trembled. Tonight was the first time I realized she'd do anything, and I mean anything. I nodded. So, tell me what you haven't said yet. He swallowed hard, glanced toward the road, as if the clipboard queen might materialize out of the shadows again. Then he finally spoke the words I'd been waiting for. She's been operating illegally for almost 3 years. My pulse kicked hard. How? The HOA's charter expired. She never renewed it. She forged signatures to keep decisions flowing. Fake elections, fake approvals, fake denials. She even created committees that don't exist in county records. I felt my jaw tighten. This was exactly the threat I needed. Jonah pressed his palms together, fingers trembling. Chase. It gets worse. The board doesn't officially exist anymore. I'm technically not even a real member. I blew out a slow breath. And she knew? She orchestrated the whole thing. He stared at the ground. She said nobody would bother checking because the neighborhood was too complacent to care. The rage simmering inside me became something sharper. Purpose. He pulled his phone out and handed it to me. Here, look at these. His thumb hovered over a folder he'd named Truth, a small act of rebellion he hadn't been brave enough to act on until tonight. I opened it, emails, screenshots, meeting minutes she'd typed herself using other people's names, photos of ballots she'd filled out alone, real evidence. You kept all this? I asked. His voice broke. I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I knew it would matter someday, just not like this. A wave of emotion hit him hard. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. She threatened my mother, Chase, told her she'd lose porch privileges if I kept hesitating. She stalked her, took pictures of her yard, invented violations. That explained his fear, why he always lingered in doorways, why he shook whenever the officer of rules screamed at him in public. She has everyone scared, he continued, but she's most afraid of you. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because you don't react the way she expects. And because, he hesitated, because she found out your brother is the SWAT captain. She thinks you'll weaponize that connection. I exhaled through my nose. I haven't. He nodded slowly. Exactly. But she's spiraling. She's terrified people will find out she lost legal authority years ago. And she's planning something big to stop you. A cold ripple slid down my spine. What kind of something? Jonah looked at me then, really looked, and I finally saw the depth of his terror. She wants you gone, he whispered. Not fined, not warned, gone. She's calling an emergency board intervention tomorrow night, and she's inviting law enforcement under false pretenses. My chest tightened. She's setting me up. His silence was my answer. He wiped his face again. Chase, I'm done protecting her. I'll testify. I'll hand over everything. I don't care if she comes after me. I'm not letting her hurt your wife again. Emotion hit me harder than I expected. His courage wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. You're not alone anymore, I said. He nodded, trembling but resolved. So, what do we do now? I closed the folder on his phone. Now, I said quietly, we build the counterstrike. I didn't sleep that night, not after what Jonah told me, not after realizing the neighborhood had been living under a ghost board run by a woman whose power existed only because no one had challenged her. While Eli kept watch upstairs, I sat alone in the dim kitchen, phone screen glowing against the dark wood table, every document Jonah gave me open in front of me. The truth wasn't just damning, it was surgical, clean, precise. A blueprint of someone who pretended to own a kingdom built on nothing but forged signatures and fear. By the time the first sliver of morning light hit the blinds, my plan wasn't just clear, it was sharp enough to cut. I stood, stretched my back, and dialed the first number I needed. County Clerk's Office, how can I help you? My name is Chase Duval, I said. I need verification on the status of an HOA charter, specifically Evergreen Ridge Association. The clerk typed, paused, typed again. Then she gave a faint, confused laugh. Sir, that charter expired 2 years and 8 months ago. There are no renewal filings, nothing pending. Exactly what I expected. Thank you, I said. Can you email me that letter of non-renewal? Of course. It'll be in your inbox shortly. One piece of proof secured. Next came the call to the state HOA registry, then local zoning, then the neighborhood's original developer, who confirmed exactly what Jonah hinted at. The HOA had no standing to issue fines, violations, or demands. Not even an inch of legal ground beneath them. Every call was fuel. Every confirmation tightened the noose around Vivian Harkness's counterfeit authority. By noon, my inbox looked like a graveyard for the board chair's entire reign. Emails, statements, screenshots, letters, everything I needed to dismantle her from the foundation up. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I drove to my brother's place, a secure facility where the SWAT training unit kept their records and practice grounds. When he saw me walk in, Eli waved the team away and closed the door behind him. You're building something, he said. I can see it in your face. I need procedural clarity, I replied, on emergency calls, false reporting, and HOA misuse of law enforcement resources. He frowned. Vivian? Yeah, I said. The enforcer in Crimson is planning an intervention tonight. She wants cops there under fake pretenses. Eli rubbed his jaw. That's not just illegal, that's reckless. I know, so tell me what statutes apply. I need everything airtight. He pulled up a screen and walked me through protocol violations, misuse of emergency dispatch, civil penalties, and the threshold for malicious intent. I memorized every detail, every law she was about to trip over. When I left, my strategy wasn't just forming, it was complete. Next stop was the community park, a wide open space where sunlight spilled across the grass. I needed air, space, a moment to feel the gravity of what I was about to unleash. 2 elderly neighbors, Mrs. Calloway and Mr. Trent, were sitting beneath the oak tree that Jonah said the HOA once threatened to chop down for aesthetic reasons. The tree stood strong anyway, a symbol of the resilience they hadn't realized they had. They waved me over nervously. We heard what happened, Mrs. Calloway whispered. Your wife, is she all right? She's safe, I told her gently, and she will stay safe. Mr. Trent looked around before leaning in. That woman is dangerous, son. The clipboard queen has been terrorizing everyone for years. If you're planning something, make it count. His voice cracked when he said it. He meant it. I glanced at the tree, its branches stretching wide like a shield. I intend to, I said. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. An unknown number, I answered cautiously. This is Chase. A shaky breath met my ear. Chase, it's Officer Delaney. I'm calling you off the record. Her voice lowered. I just saw a dispatch alert. The tyrant in heels is preparing a call to report you as a threat to the community. My pulse tightened. What grounds? None, just her word, but she's pushing it through fast. The officer hesitated. She's calling it an imminent danger situation. If she files this, units will respond. A chill rolled down my spine, but not fear. Focus. Thank you, I said. You've just confirmed the last piece. What piece? The one that proves intent. I hung up, eyes narrowing as the plan clicked perfectly into place. By tonight, the officer of rules was going to learn what real accountability looked like. By late afternoon, the sky over Evergreen Ridge had turned the color of polished steel, calm, muted, and waiting, the quiet before the collision. I drove back home with every document, recording, and verification secured, but the real preparation still had to be done. Tonight wasn't about reacting to Vivian Harkness. Tonight was about ending her reign. I stepped into my home and found Eli at the dining table, assembling gear the way only a SWAT captain could. Methodical, organized, efficient. Not weapons, not tactics. Just communication equipment, body cams, time-stamped tools, evidence collectors. He didn't need to say anything. He already knew what this night represented. You ready? He asked. As ready as she's ever pushed me to be. My wife rested on the couch, a blanket over her legs. Her hand instinctively covered her stomach as she watched me with quiet strength. Seeing her like that, safe, but still shaken, cemented everything. The image of the clipboard queen dragging her from the car burned through my mind again, fueling the part of me that refused to let this town fall to someone like that. I kissed her forehead, then stepped into the garage, not for documents, not for hidden files, but to gather the tools I needed: a tripod, a dash cam, a drone, all perfectly legal, all crucial, the drone especially. I powered it up, watching the lights flicker on. This wasn't about spying or trespassing. This was about recording public behavior in public spaces. The tyrant in heels had relied for too long on cornering people behind closed doors. Not tonight. While the drone calibrated, Eli approached. "You want an escort?" he asked. "No, if SWAT walks in first, she spins it." He nodded. "Then we'll stay on standby. But Chase, call if things shift." At 6:15 p.m., I received the notification Jonah warned me about. Emergency HOA board intervention, mandatory attendance, no location, just a time, 7:00 p.m. Classic officer of rules behavior, ambiguous, manipulative, designed to intimidate. I strapped the drone to my pack and headed out. The meeting spot revealed itself when I reached the community's open-air pavilion, faded wood beams, string lights, and a long table Vivian Harkness had claimed as her district command center. She stood at the center of it all, red jacket blazing like a warning flare. Jonah lingered behind her, pale, hands shaking slightly. Our eyes met, and I gave the slightest nod. His guilt was turning into resolve. I needed that. A small crowd gathered, neighbors from every corner of the block, some whispering, some trembling, all tired of being dominated by someone who shouldn't even hold the title she'd been swinging like a sword. The enforcer in crimson lifted her chin and crossed her arms the moment she saw me. "You're late," she snapped. "I wasn't aware we were following your schedule," I replied calmly, "considering you don't legally have one." Her jaw twitched, a tiny victory. I placed the tripod down. She stiffened. "What do you think you're doing?" "Recording," I replied. "Public space, public meeting, public accountability." Murmurs spread. She hated that. I positioned the camera, hit record, and let it run. Jonah stepped slightly away from her, tiny but noticeable. The tyrant in heels noticed too. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion brewing. I took out the second item, the drone. I set it on the ground, synced it with my phone, and launched it upward. It hovered above the pavilion, quiet but perfectly steady. She tried to mask her alarm. "That's unnecessary." "That's transparency," I said. People were watching now, really watching. This was how her control crumbled. She slammed a folder on the table. "We're here to address your wife's behavior and your escalating hostility toward this board." "Board?" I asked. Interesting word choice. A few neighbors gasped under their breath. Vivian Harkness's face flushed. "You're required to comply." "Required by who?" I cut in. "Because the county clerk says your HOA charter expired 2 years and 8 months ago." Silence fell like a hammer. "And the state registry says you have no board standing, no authority to issue fines, no legal right to demand anything from anyone here." Her eyes widened. The clipboard queen was unraveling. "And," I continued, "I've confirmed you intend to place a false emergency call tonight. Officer Delaney already warned me." The crowd shifted from uncertain to outraged. Vivian stepped back, breath catching. The officer of rules had finally been cornered by the very structure she pretended to master. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jonah stepped forward, voice shaking. "She forged signatures," he said. "All of them, and I'm done protecting her." Gasps broke through the air. I turned to Vivian. "Tonight," I said quietly, "your rule ends." And for the first time, she had no comeback. The pavilion dissolved into a storm of whispers the moment Jonah exposed her forgeries. But the silence around Vivian Harkness herself was different. Thick, cold, electric. She stood motionless in the middle of the wooden platform, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, every inch of her body vibrating with the fury of someone watching her empire crack under her feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't even move. I just let the truth hang in the air like a siren she couldn't turn off. The board chair snapped out of her trance first, slamming both palms on the table. "This meeting is not over," she barked, voice shaking. "I still have authority." "No," I uttered, steady and low. "You don't." Her eyes burned into me. But it wasn't anger anymore. It was panic. The kind people feel when they realize the mask they have worn for years has been torn off in a single motion. Neighbors stepped away from her, almost instinctively. The enforcer in crimson noticed the shift, and her fingers curled around the edge of the table, like she needed something to anchor herself. I lifted the remote for the drone. For the record, I said, this entire meeting is being documented from 2 angles. Your tone, your statements, Jonah's testimony, all of it. She stiffened. You can't record me without my consent. In a public open-air meeting you called? I replied. I absolutely can. A few neighbors nodded. Her control, her intimidation tactics, were slipping fast. She straightened her blazer, as if adjusting it would somehow restore the persona she was used to. All of you are making a very large mistake, she warned. This man has been a disruptive force since the day he moved in. His wife violated regulations. He resisted compliance. Compliance with what? Mr. Trent interrupted sharply. A defunct HOA? A fake board? Vivian's nostrils flared again. I stepped forward, close enough that only she and the nearest couple of neighbors could hear. You dragged a pregnant woman out of her car, I said quietly. You crossed a line you can't uncross. Her lips trembled, barely noticeable, but real. The clipboard queen backed away from me, shaking her head as though my voice were static she couldn't mute. None of that was intentional, she stammered. She was resisting. She raised her voice. I was ensuring safety. By physically grabbing her? I asked. She had no answer. And now, I added, you intend to call the police with a fabricated emergency, to have me detained, or worse, removed. Her eyes widened in horror, because I wasn't guessing. I knew. Eli stepped toward the pavilion then, not in uniform, not as SWAT, but as my brother. He didn't speak, but his presence alone created a shift. People straightened. Vivian's confidence deflated another inch. The tyrant in heels shot me a venomous glare. You coordinated this. No, I said. You did. I just stopped letting you hide. The officer of rules pressed her fingers to her temple, like she was battling a migraine. You don't understand what's at stake, she whispered. Oh, I understand, I replied. You've controlled this block for so long that you forgot something important. She blinked at me, slow, strained. You forgot the law still exists. Her breath caught, the tiniest gasp slipping between her lips. She knew I wasn't bluffing. I turned to the neighbors. Tonight's supposed intervention isn't legal. You're not required to be here. She has no authority to demand attendance, issue citations, impose rules, or control your property. Whispers surged again, angry ones this time. Mrs. Calloway stepped forward. Then what happens now, Chase? I looked back at Vivian, who looked smaller than she ever had, cornered, teeth gritted, fingers trembling at her sides. Now, I said, we prepare for the only thing she responds to, accountability. The enforcer in crimson shook her head violently. You're not taking this from me. You took it from yourself, I replied. She spun toward her folding chair, snatching her phone as if gripping a weapon. I'm calling emergency services, right now. You're a threat. Gasps erupted. I lifted my own phone calmly. Go ahead, I said. Because the moment you press that button, the false reporting violation becomes indisputable. Vivian froze mid-motion. Every neighbor watched her. Her hand trembled over the screen. You do that, I continued, and you'll be let out of this pavilion in handcuffs. Her throat bobbed, sweat gathered at her temples. Her finger hovered, then slowly withdrew. The clipboard queen had finally discovered what fear felt like. I stepped closer. Tonight was just positioning, I said quietly. Tomorrow is the confrontation. Vivian Harkness didn't respond. She couldn't. The next evening felt nothing like the night before. Word spread through Evergreen Ridge like a spark racing through dry brush. By 6:30 p.m., people weren't hiding behind curtains anymore. They were gathering, not out of fear, but out of anger that had finally found a crack to escape through. The community center parking lot overflowed. Porch lights glowed across the block. Neighbors who'd spent years whispering their frustrations now stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting, watching, ready. This wasn't a meeting. This was a reckoning. I walked toward the center doors with Eli beside me, not as SWAT, not as muscle, but as quiet support. My wife stood at the front with a hand on her stomach, surrounded by neighbors who refused to let her stand alone. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Inside, the board's long table had been dragged to the front of the main hall. Folding chairs lined the room, everyone filled. And there, clinging to the illusion of power she could no longer hold, sat Vivian Harkness. The board chair looked different tonight. The red blazer was still there, but the sharpness she usually wore like armor had dulled. Her lips were tight, her hands stiff. She didn't look like a ruler preparing to speak. She looked like someone bracing for judgment. The murmur of voices died the moment I stepped forward. Vivian's eyes locked onto mine, with the ferocity of someone trying to rebuild a collapsing persona. "This is a formal HOA meeting," she announced, voice tight. "No," I said. "This is a community meeting. You don't have a functioning HOA to hide behind anymore." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. She stood abruptly, pointing a trembling finger. "You don't have the authority to—" "And you do," I asked. Because according to the county clerk, the state registry, and the original charter, the Evergreen Ridge HOA legally ceased to exist 2 years and 8 months ago. Gasps, shocked murmurs, a few outraged shouts from the back. Vivian's face reddened. The enforcer in crimson opened her mouth, but Jonah stepped forward from the second row. "She forged votes," he said, voice projecting across the hall. "All of them. I helped her type minutes for meetings that never happened." The eruption was immediate. People stood from their chairs. Some shouted. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. A few elderly neighbors looked like someone had just peeled back the sky to reveal a new universe. The clipboard queen staggered a step backward. "That's not—" she tried. I lifted my phone. "We have the documents, the verification, the emails, and the evidence of your planned false emergency call from last night." The room grew so quiet it felt unreal. "She dragged a pregnant woman from her car," Mrs. Calloway called out. "She threatened my husband over a flower pot." "She fined me for a flag that honors my son," another voice shouted. "She stalked my mother," Jonah added, voice cracking but steady. The tyrant in heels pressed a hand to her forehead. "This is a smear campaign," she spat. "One man, one troublemaker has poisoned all of you." "No," I said. "You did that. You used fear as law. You acted like the officer of rules when you weren't even legally on a board." She shook her head violently. "You don't get it. None of you get it. If the HOA dissolves, property values drop. Banks pull loans. Investors walk away. I was protecting this neighborhood from collapse." "By committing fraud?" Eli asked, stepping forward. "By abusing authority you didn't have? That's not saving a neighborhood. That's tyranny." Vivian's desperation spiked. She grabbed the mic on the table with both hands. "I have served this community for 10 years, she cried. "I've kept order. I've kept standards. If you remove structure, you invite chaos." "Structure?" I echoed. "Or control?" She froze. A flicker of fear passed behind her eyes. I turned to the audience. If you want a real vote, a legal vote, if you want to rebuild something fair, something transparent, tonight is where it starts. A chorus of voices rose in agreement. Vivian slammed the mic down. "This is illegal." "No," I said. "This is democracy." The crowd erupted in applause. Her final attempt was a scream. "You ruined everything?" I looked her in the eye. "No," I said softly. "I ended what you never had the right to begin." The room stood behind me, not out of pressure, but out of choice. And for the first time, Vivian Harkness realized she had no throne left to stand on. Her kingdom was gone, her power dissolved, and tomorrow, the resolution would seal it forever. The morning after the confrontation carried a strange kind of stillness, the type that settles over a battlefield when the smoke finally clears. Evergreen Ridge felt lighter, doors were open, neighbors talked freely on sidewalks instead of whispering behind curtains. Even the air felt different, as if the block itself had exhaled for the first time in years. I walked toward the community center, the same place where the crowd had risen up the night before. People nodded as I passed, some with relief, some with gratitude, some with the lingering shock of seeing the board chair brought to her knees publicly. Inside, the county compliance officer waited for me, a calm, steady woman in a navy jacket with a folder tucked under her arm. "Mr. Duval?" she asked. "Yes." She opened the folder. "We reviewed your submissions last night. The evidence was overwhelming. It confirms that Vivian Harkness has been operating a dissolved HOA, issuing unlawful notices, forging documentation, and obstructing residents' access to accurate legal information. A breath I didn't realize I was holding, released slowly, she continued. The state has officially recorded the HOA as expired, with no right to enforce rules, collect dues, or manage property standards. As of today, Evergreen Ridge is fully and formally unburdened of her governance. A small wave of applause rippled from the handful of neighbors gathered behind me. The enforcer in crimson wasn't there. I wasn't sure if she'd even left her house that morning. But the officer pulled out one more document. We also reviewed the attempted emergency call she prepared. The compliance officer added, "False reporting, especially when directed at a private citizen with intent to intimidate, is a serious offense. Law enforcement will be issuing penalties." She didn't say arrest, but she didn't need to. I knew the consequences, and most importantly, Vivian knew them too. After signing a few final statements, I stepped outside. A small group had gathered around my wife, checking on her, making sure she felt safe. She smiled at me, tired but stronger than she'd looked since that awful moment when the clipboard queen dragged her from our car. When I reached her, she whispered, "Is it over?" "Almost," I said, because there was one more thing I needed to do. I walked to Vivian Harkness's house, not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but because endings matter, closure matters, and I wanted her to hear this from me directly. Neighbors watched quietly from their porches as I approached. The tyrant in heels opened the door before I even knocked. Her face was pale, her hair undone, her confidence stripped to its skeleton. "You won," she said bitterly. "No," I replied. "The truth won?" Her jaw tightened. "They turned on me." "They woke up," I corrected. "There's a difference." She looked away, blinking hard. "You don't understand how hard it is to manage a community. Someone has to keep things in order." "You used fear," I said. "Fear isn't order, it's exploitation." Silence settled between us. A car drove by slowly. The wind rattled the branches overhead. Finally, she whispered, "What happens now?" "You accept the consequences," I said gently. "You step away, and you let this community rebuild, without intimidation, without forged elections, without you standing over every decision like you own the air people breathe." Her eyes glistened. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was just the sting of defeat. But even then, some small part of her still couldn't let go. "I thought I was helping," she muttered. "You hurt people," I said. "You hurt my wife." That broke her. Her shoulders sagged. Her gaze fell to the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. It wasn't enough, not for what she'd done. But it was the first, real thing she'd said since all this began. I nodded once and walked away, leaving her in the doorway of a house that suddenly felt too big for her authority. When I reached the main street again, neighbors gathered around me, smiling, relieved, energized by the future they were finally free to shape. Jonah approached last, eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "You did it," he said. "We did it," I corrected. "Together." He nodded, voice soft but sure. "The neighborhood's better because of you." I turned to everyone. "This place heals now. No more fear, no more threats, no more false rules." Applause rose, real, heartfelt, unanimous. And with the weight finally gone, I looked into the camera I'd set down earlier. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Evergreen Ridge had a new beginning, and this time, it belonged to the people.